So I actually wanted to take advantage of this moment to just give everybody a quick update about Regen Network. Um, Oftentimes I'm accused by my fantastic team and community of not taking enough stage space to actually talk about all the amazing things that are happening at Regen Network. Um, so I'm going to take advantage of just sharing some big things that just happened because we just launched a two-way bridge with Polygon and have carbon liquidity happening on osmosis decks. So there's a whole interchain interoperability story that we've been working on for a year basically to complete, and there's a bunch of other things to just kind of go over quickly and be like, hey, wow, bunch of things are happening that I think are really exciting and have been moving the space. I'm going to try to get through that in about 4 more minutes and then spend the rest of my talk talking about the 6 strings of refi and this idea of tuning some of the key tensions that we experience as an industry, which I brought up in the keynote, the sort of like ending keynote at SBS in Paris. So I just wanted to do a little revisit. That 10-minute talk is going to be interactive, so I'll want interaction and comment and engagement from everybody. It's meant to just be a little bit of a retrospective of where we're at. So what's new with Regen? Well, as I said, we have this amazing bridge with Polygon. We co-created this with Toucan. I don't see John in here, but got to say hi to him earlier. Really excited. This was a 2-team engineering effort. People know how hard bridges are. It was actually, I kind of laugh because we thought we were going to have this done in like 6 weeks, and it took us like 18 months or something to finish, but it's done. And what this means is that we can, beginning with NCT, because it's actually gated by specific metadata standards, right? So it's not just any token or thing that moves across, specific metadata standards that the bridge allows to cross. So starting with the Nature Carbon Ton, which is Vera produced nature carbon from 2012 and onward, if you're thinking about sort of like where that lands in the spectrum of different credits, can cross the bridge, be instantiated on the Regen Network, and have its full functionality. So once it crosses the bridge, it can be retired, it can be exchanged, it can be basketed or pooled. So right now, there is a new carbon pool on Osmosis with or 2 new carbon pools with Osmosis NCT and Regen NCT trading pairs. It's exciting. Took a lot of work. Woohoo! So you just see our little Osmosis avatar woman and the image there. And then I also just wanted to talk a little bit about, this NCT coming over and that sort of first generation of tokenized carbon credits, which were that one-way bridge process that Toucan launched. We also have an amazing set of credits, which are a 2-way bridge relationship with the city forest credits, which are from the United States and our municipalities collaborating to do reforestation, afforestation, and conservation. So those credits are live in the marketplace. So you have this really quite broad diversity of credits that are live in Regen Marketplace. And I'm excited to say there are 6 new fully Regen native credits coming through our community registration system, which involves internal review, public comment, and external academic peer review of the methodologies that are coming. And that represents a spectrum of all of our credits that are coming through the native registry are 100% either carbon removal, if they're carbon credits, or there's a new generation of biodiversity and environmental stewardship credits that can be correlated to carbon but aren't making carbon claims. So really excited about that. Now let's get on, now that I did the news, the new and good from Regen, let's get on to the real crux of things. Like, where are we at as industry? There's some tensions, there's some challenges. If I'll just to remind people, or for those of you who didn't watch my talk last time, the premise here is that there are tensions and we kind of need to be tuning them actively as a process, not that there is one side or the other which is right. And I think so oftentimes people, like we turn things into black and white and right and wrong. And so these are meant to be presented as an exploration. And I'm going to try to just sort of like invoke some concrete examples of things that are happening in each of these strings. And we can be just kind of envision we're going through a little bit of a tuning process. We might be a little out of tune. Do we need to tighten things up a little bit? Do we need to go one direction or the other? And we'll just sort of see. This is an ongoing thought experiment. And thanks to Alan and the Filecoin team for continuing to humor me as I ask to talk about this stuff with everybody. Okay, so this is the 6. These are the 6. This was somewhat extemporaneous, kind of ad hoc, and I just stuck with the same ones. And so several of these were generated by the audience, and 100% of them I made up on the spot last year. But let's check in and see if they hold weight and how they're going. So sovereignty versus coordination, fungibility versus exchangeability, uniqueness or non-fungibility, different ways of talking about that I think are important to kind of all list out. The feminine versus the masculine approach to things, socialized risk versus individual risk, immutability versus flexibility, and commons approach versus private property approaches. So these were the different tensions where sometimes the conversation, again, collapses into a polarity. We should be doing it this way. We should be doing it that way. You're wrong. I'm right, or whatever it is. And my premise here is that these are actually, we need to hold these in tension and tune them according to the specific context and situation, or if you will, to extend the metaphor, the song that we're singing and the note that we want to create in that particular circumstance. So let's talk about sovereignty versus coordination. I'm just going to take a pause. Does this invoke anything that anybody wants to shout out that is like alive right now in the refi movement? Not to put anybody in the spot, but just brief moment for audience participation.
Yeah, why do you think sovereignty is the opposite of coordination?
Well, they're just in tension. So the way that I was explaining this last time is, so it's sort of like sovereignty has to do with my personal rights and individual ability to express, or even a community's sovereignty, and like we have this boundary and we do these things. Coordination relies on us probably compromising, maybe having deeper layers of communal engagements. And so these are oftentimes in tension. So if we're going to make a contract with one another, we have to kind of sort of like negotiate that and figure that out. So what I'm calling out is not that they're opposite, but there's a tension between them, and sort of tuning that tension is important. So some of the ways that I think about this are, I feel like, just to be honest, the refi movement has collapsed into a dumpster fire of player versus player madness, in which we're not accomplishing much and people are replicating efforts and they're trying to get their sort of like sovereign win over the system, instead of sort of like maybe sacrificing their ability as an individual actor to do like winner takes all and coordinating. And this is like a classic prisoner's dilemma moment. So from my perspective, if we're tuning this sort of like sovereignty versus coordination and we're self-assessing how are we doing as a movement, I would say we're way out of tune. Alan.
Well, it also brings to mind the way that current traditionally works, that it's being very centralized, right? Versus decentralized to sort of the implication coordination.
Yeah.
Which we can do what Regen is doing, right? And like issue tokens based on community standards rather than a centralized authority.
Right. I think that there's a whole dimension of that which is where I would say a pathway to be tuning this is understanded nested sovereignty and nested coordination, right? Where there isn't just like one single system, but you may have a little group of people or individuals who come together to form a standard that may be at the national level, that could be at the local level, and also, consortium building, coordination. Alexi was talking about this in the previous panel. So I think there's an instinct about how to tune this up, but I honestly, my self-appraisal as a member of a community is that we're out of tune on this one. So let's talk about fungibility versus exchangeability, right? Or fungibility and exchangeability versus uniqueness and non-exchangeability, right? The tension of that. This is really important in carbon markets, right? Because we're talking about uniqueness and traceability and provenance and like, did the exact people who needed to get paid? Where did the data come from? Like Gainforest is working on, but then on the other hand, can we create a liquidity pool that is deeply liquid and gives us, real-time price discovery information? These two things are at odds, actually, right? And I think we have the idea that we can sprinkle some magic Web3 fairy dust on that and it fixes it automatically. But actually, I would propose that there's some significant technical, social, and governance challenges that we have to face, and that this tension is really important, not to get right, but to figure out how we're tuning in different circumstances, right? So what are some of the examples that have been addressed? So you have like the NCT pooling that Toucan has created, and you can pay a fee to turn it back into a non-fungible unique token that you choose, versus you can do it for free and just get the oldest one, just as an example of how a particular group of people has approached this. You have in Regen, in the case of our third-party two-way registry integration with city forest credits, we don't allow basketing and pooling. They maintain uniqueness and can be exchanged or traded based on a unique value, but there isn't a sort of like concept of creating some liquidity pool which is all like versus like. And that's because of the particular desires and wants of that community that has created those credits and like honoring their threshold about where they're comfortable about uniqueness. Anybody have any other examples that they just want to shout out around this tension? Alan, I see you getting ready.
Yeah, I mean, there's some amount of fungibility built into the concept of a carbon market, right? Because there's positive CO2 and negative CO2.
Right. Right. There's an idea that we have a globally fungible carbon cycle, and that and I would argue at a year-over-year basis that's fungible, because as soon as you go into past and future, it becomes non-fungible actually in terms of outcomes. Alexi.
Yeah, but also there's another idea that there are co-benefits and they're unique for each project.
Totally.
Community, right? So how can we combine those two things? Is there a technical way, to have the light is a particle and a wave at the same time?
Exactly. It's a particle and a wave.
Dualist approach here as well.
Yeah. So thank you. That's great. I think we're sort of getting an example of this. I'm going to keep moving because I apparently only have 2 minutes left. Do I think the last one's in tune? No, but I think we're working on it. The other one feels like maybe we were less working on it. It's more like we're going the opposite direction. That one, I feel like there's like traction, there's tuning, we're like moving things, we're seeing how things work. Feminine versus masculine. I'm not going to go too far into this, but just sort of checking in. The prompt here is just consider, like, are we leaping ahead to fix some problem, or are we creating space to nurture and, midwife something that is emerging and novel? Like, which energy? This is from an energetic perspective was the prompt. So I would say we're kind of like way overbalanced on the masculine side, and it's pretty out of tune. Not even commenting on gender dynamics in the industry, but just like from an energetic perspective. They're all part of this interrelated whole in which each one reflects an element of the other, and they're all part of the same instrument we're trying to play. Okay, socialized risk versus individual risk. So this is the idea, like, to what degree are we placing risk on an individual investor, a retail investor, or are we creating like an insurance system that socializes that risk amongst different parties? I'm not going to go too deep into this because I've got 20 seconds left. Immutability versus flexibility. This one I actually think is really important because it has to do with, at the end of the day, it has to do with how do we generate confidence, trust, and sort of like a governance system that is stable enough to do business with, to get traction on, to build institutions around. and yet dynamic enough to adapt to reality and not sort of like given to entrenched interests or entrenched technology. I think this is being worked on, but my assessment of the industry is it's kind of pretty poorly understood and gets sort of like bandwagoned around, interests and whatnot. Commons versus private property. I'm going to go back to that and end with this one, mostly with a provocation, just to leave everybody with, because my time is out. So I want everybody to just take a moment to try to reflect on, are you a participant of a commons? I know that every one of you will be easily able to identify where you have private property, inclination, ideas, or sort of like assets. Where are you participating in a commons? What is the resource that you're governing? Who are the other people in the commons? Just go through a moment and ask. And how does that relate to all of the other strings? And just take a moment to think about that, and then I'll close with that. So thank you all, and sorry for running just a little bit over, and really grateful for the time.